The long run, Israel has been recognized as a scapegoat to monopolize the people.
That's why I have really written this book, my last book. You know, in 1948, July 1948, roughly about 1 million Palestinians were kicked out of Palestine, including my family. You could see these soon-to-be exiles. You could see these million souls trekking up north to seek refuge in Lebanon, arriving there harrowed and beaten. You could see them trekking south to seek refuge in Gaza, arriving equally harrowed and beaten. And you could see them trekking east after they were expelled from the twin cities of Lydda and Ramla by the Israeli forces, led by no other than Yitzhak Rabin, who 30 years later, almost exactly 30 years later, ordered his army to break the bones of the children, of the descendants of these people whom he kicked out. Of course, the Israelis that year, 1948, would have loved for these million Palestinians to trek west and to keep on trekking west to end up in the Mediterranean, never to be heard from again. But almost 50 years later, Rabin and the rest of the world has in fact heard from us again and again and again. And these million refugees, exiles, went from being 1 million, they doubled to 2 million, they tripled to 3 million, and now they have almost quadrupled to 4 million. I, as a writer for the last quarter century, for the last 25 years, if you wish, have concerned myself with the ebb and flow, the stress and strain, the trials and tribulations, if you wish, of life in exile. I wrote my first book. When I wrote my first book, The Disinherited, back in 1972, that's what I was concerned with. When I wrote my second book, Soul in Exile, in 1988, that's what I was concerned with. And when I sat down 3.5 years ago to write my third book, to complete the trilogy about exile, to round it out, so to speak, I realized that there was something missing. There was something decidedly missing from my narrative. And that was the realization that that my trilogy will not really be complete, my story will not be really complete, unless and until such time as I went back to the home ground where I was born. And that's what I did. I had to find out for myself, physically to be there, to understand the link between exile and the home ground. To prove to myself that Palestinians in exile and Palestinians in the homeland, or what I call the home ground, are not separate from each other. They are linked organically together, like in a sort of historical umbilical cord. And this is what, of course, nowadays the Israelis and other forces are trying to do. They are trying to say to us that the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, in Palestine, are an entirely separate society, separate culture, separate people from those who live in exile. And hence, to round out my trilogy, I went to Palestine, and I stayed there for about 6 weeks. And I went to Haifa, where I was born. I went to see the house where I was born. But what did the experience do to me? What did it say to me when I went back to the town where I had been born 40 years before? What kind of metamorphosis did I go through? To tell you the truth, I was not expecting the impulses that were triggered by my encounter with the home ground that I had left 40 years before. I walked around Haifa, and this is what I say. I walked around Haifa all day. I had thought so often about doing it that I was convinced the experience was somehow going to enter my consciousness and catch fire. It did not. I was a stranger in a strange city that under different circumstances I would have found boring, tacky, and uptight. I was angry at myself for having thought that the experience was somehow going to be existentially enriching, emotionally rewarding, and intellectually edifying. But I felt nothing. My sensibility had become so honed at the whetstone of exile that it revolted at the notion of rootedness to a place. And my intellect had long since developed an abhorrence for the obsessive preoccupations of nationalism. But I had to imagine what I wanted to imagine about Haifa. I was born here. There are people everywhere walking around me, in front of me, behind me, bumping into me, some even exchanging glances with me. The whole place readily communicating the quick of the human spirit that inhabits it. But I feel nothing. If I were to tell these people who I am, they would call my heart my head and declare my roots to be my horoscope. I cannot speak to them. I cannot drag the ocean, holding it by the scruff of its neck, to the house of our past. I cannot tell these people how my very breath has bound me to this land, this sea, this morning. You know, I had never been in Jerusalem before. Haifa, yes, I was born there, and I brought some vivid images and some very blurred images because I left when I was a child. But I had not seen Jerusalem. And when you see Jerusalem, you know, from the top of the Mount of Olives, something happens to you. There is no other city like it when you see it from the top of Mount Olives. And that's what I did. When I first saw Jerusalem, the whole of Jerusalem, from the top of the Mount of Olives, I had to clap my hand to my mouth, almost gasping at the sight. Streaks of bright afternoon light smoldered on it and made it look, encapsulated as it was within its ancient walls, like a giant pomegranate. If a city ever exuded a mysterious meaning, Jerusalem must be the one. For contemplating the city from the Mount of Olives, I feel that my senses are host to something more beautiful than beauty. The force of the obvious hits you. Jerusalem is the way it is because it is Jerusalem. We cannot, should not ask, what is Jerusalem like, or what is like Jerusalem? That is because the core of our identity as Muslims, Christians, and Jews was apprehended here. We are because it is. Our God may have created himself through that cosmic scream known as the Big Bang, but we created ourselves right here through the fiat of religion. When there was nothingness and void in their lives, Muslims, Christians, and Jews came here to define themselves, to affirm that there is being and substance and word. But self-definition and affirmation are acts of rage and repossession. And that is why Jerusalem became a site of endless violence. There is animate logic in calling this land the Holy Land, and nothing else. To call it a nation, a state, a country is like debasing a rose by using its botanical name. When this land is freed from the petty effusions of politics and the venomous fabric of nationalism, and when we allow it, this little piece of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, to make accessible the magic of its metaphoric affinities with our being, then we have to call it simply what it calls itself, the Holy Land. No person who encounters this land in this manner could give to another so much of his love. I want to tell you what I felt, my last glimpses in Palestine. I had to go back home, you know. Washington was home to me. I had lived in Washington for 20 years. I'm a homeboy, all right? I may not have been born here. I just wanted to come back to my hood, man. I wanted to be back in D.C. with my friends. That's where I belong. I may be a Palestinian, born and bred and raised as a Palestinian exile, and I may support the Palestinians all the way. I may die for them, sacrifice for them, live for them, struggle for them. But in the end, as I said earlier, as I read earlier, my sensibility had become so honed at the whetstone of exile that the idea of being rooted to a place repels me, you know? So what was my last glimpse of Palestine? My last glimpse of this land, as I was being driven to the airport the following day, was of a Palestinian kid in an Arab village, standing silently at a street corner, leaning against a wall, contemplating life with eyes that stared from the slit of his checkered hatta. His eyes seemed to mask a hot rage, a readiness to combat all of life with brute ferocity. He looked so native to his world, so rooted in its harsh realities, so confident about its codes of meaning. I am a madman to have attempted a journey to the desolate frontiers of Palestine's soul. I am so little worthy of taking on this task, for I come from a hollow place where I have silenced all the voices from my past. Oh yes, I am used to dread and to its language of divine resurrection. I have run into the Palestinian storm and become woven into its dance. But no one, not even the God before God, can make an echo without a voice. Now, I'm ready to go home. I love this land. Everything about it, like a beautiful tree visible from all directions, bristles with conjecture about life. I love it the way it wants to be loved, in a holy way. But I'm also wary of it. I am tired of its people's shadows, its people's flames, its people's darkness. I am tired of the way they have debased it by their fighting. I have better things to do than concern myself with the trivia of nationalism. I have to look, before I die, for one last land behind the mountains, even if the search should lead, as perhaps it may, to desolation grow. My people are everywhere, because they come from everywhere. I don't want to kill anybody's soul. I am, in the end, who everyone else is. You know, my struggle in exile, the struggle for self-definition and meaning, is always, in my book here, embodied in what I call the search for the land behind the mountains. In other words, when I find a new land, i.e. a new idea, a new vision, a new metaphor, a new idiom, fine, then I feel that I have to go beyond that to look for yet another land behind the mountains, to grow, to develop, transform as a human being. But I am not just a Palestinian. I am an infinite number of subsystems that make up my human system. I'm a Palestinian, fine, but I'm a human being. I'm a man. I'm a writer. I'm a poet. I'm a working man. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a bullshit artist, whatever you want to call me. I am all of these things and many, many more. And in my search for the land behind the mountains, and this search includes, of course, in a leading positional value, the struggle for Palestinian statehood and freedom, I have to ascertain for myself that my reality is also real, that my meaning is meaningful. You know, when you have lived in exile as I have for 40 years, homelessness becomes your home. You become comfortable with being stateless, you know. It's like it's part of you. You grow up with it like you grow up with your skin. You know what I'm saying? So in the epilogue, I have written an epilogue here. I'm reading the last page in my book. I ask myself, what do I want to do? I mean, if there's a Palestinian state, do I really want to go back? I mean, the idea of Palestinian statehood is very important to me, but is it important for me to go back to continue this struggle, you know? And I say, 45 years of exile are homeland enough. Anywhere where one is free to watch one's favorite movies, reread one's favorite classics, listen to one's favorite music, support one's favorite unpopular causes, and above all, do one's work without fear of retribution, is homeland enough. I need not live in Nablus or Jericho or Gaza. I could live anywhere. I am with my people, those from any part of the world with whom I share a commonality of values and a certain way of life. Paris, Sydney, or New York will do, especially New York, because New Yorkers are like Palestinians in many ways. They too are born of tragedy. Their ancestors landed at Ellis Island after escaping a Tsar who claimed to love them, a brother struggler who had anointed himself head of the national family, a tyrant who did not like their ethnic roots, a colonial oppressor who robbed them of their potatoes and couldn't care less about their famine. And there are other New Yorkers whose ancestors did not land on Plymouth Rock. Instead, as Malcolm X put it, Plymouth Rock landed on them. Like Palestinians, New Yorkers are a little mad, a little lonely, a little disgruntled. They live with no regard for the concerns of the rest of the planet and stare with murder in their eye if you dare to suggest that there's any place better than where they come from. And I need not die in Haifa, Safed, or Jaffa. Washington will do. I have lived here longer than in any other part of the world. Nor, when I am dust and forgotten, should it be of any consequence to anyone where my remains are buried. Still, even to a hardened exile like myself, the emergence of a Palestinian state touches some covert longings in my soul. It will, in any case, compel me to rename myself. Palestinians in the home ground will laugh at those who continue to Palestinians in the home ground will laugh at those who continue to ascribe to their name attributes that predate the new Palestine. Henceforth, a Palestinian becomes what he is because he lives in Palestine. Believe us, they will say, we built a state because of our need for a safe haven, not for love of nationalism. Come over here and live with us. We will turn our soul's concern in your direction. بتدير بالنا عليك يعني. May the Lord pour acid on your exile and destroy all the homes you built in it. Come. This idea of a state is too fantastic. A Palestinian state? Surely this is the stuff of which dreams are made. I can see myself 10 years from now succumbing to the fantasy. In this dream, I fly to Palestine. My plane lands at Jericho Airport. I am traveling light. Some clothes, some notebooks, and a toothbrush. There is no need to bring anything else. This is a modern country, and I can buy everything I need here. I walk to immigration and stand in line. Outside, the sun, as usual, shines brightly. Awaiting me is a life among the olive trees in a town by the River Jordan. The official greets me effusively and asks how I feel. I tell him I feel great, and it is the truth. He stamps my passport and says, "Welcome to Palestine." As I walk out of the airport, I repeat the name to myself. I want to test the sound of it, to make sure it is real. I repeat it once, twice, thrice, then utter it as if in babble, like an infant who had not yet mastered words. I hop in a cab, and I'm driven along a paved road, hugging the river. The cabbie tells me the road was completed just 4 years before, after the PLO lost the vote in a democratically contested election. And the new president, whom everyone calls Brother Zachariah, who is a character I met in the West Bank, took on the task of eliminating corruption and building the economy. The taxi driver turns on his car radio, and I hear Palestinian folk music. The lyrics, simple and benign, and not about struggle or death or sacrifice or steadfastness in the face of foreign oppressors. I reach out as if to touch the sounds, to grab them from the air and rest them on my chest. I ask the driver how far it is to my destination, and he points ahead of him. "Right there, brother," he tells me, "just behind those mountains in the distance." Thank you. Thanks. I want to tell you, as a writer, I have preoccupied myself exclusively with the issue of dealing with exile, Palestinian exile. I'm trying to retrieve, so to speak, the inner history, the consciousness of the Palestinian identity from the news, to save it, rescue it from the distorted images that people have about it, especially in this part of the world. And I feel that as such, being a writer, I'm an artist, and I am doing something I'll say that at the cost of being immodest. I'm doing something valuable for the Palestinian heritage, for Palestinian literature. And it's always the destitute, it's always the starving artist, the starving writer who shoulders the burden of enriching, as he himself is impoverished. He enriches the culture of his people by digging deep into the very inner history, as I was saying, of his people's struggle and rescuing it, retrieving it. Okay, you want to help starving writers? Come and buy books. But yes, I know, of course, I'm coming to that. Let's wrap. I mean, this is not a formal encounter here. Let's just talk, and you can ask me any questions at all about anything to do with this issue, or even about my own situation. I mean, we are buddies here, so Mark will be able to edit this, I'm sure, and Helene. So if you ask me about my sex life or something like that, we can talk about that. No, I'm kidding. Just kidding.
You're in no danger, I'm afraid. Tell us about your visit to your personal home. You went to the home where you were born.
Yeah, I write about it here. I didn't want to read because I couldn't read everything here. But that was a traumatic experience. I obviously wanted to go there and just to inspect the passions that this place had once housed, I mean, I was born in that house. I wanted to be there. I knocked on the door. This old man comes out with a heavy...